We have a massive Leafs trade update to go over today as a shocking new report from Frank Saravalli has dropped, revealing some wild details as it pertains to Brad Treliving's trade deadline plans as we are now just days away. We're going to break down exactly who that target is and discuss what it means going forward as things continue to get extremely interesting. But before we get into that, folks, quick reminder, hit that subscribe button. If you're part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Leafs content. And we're going to keep you up to date all trade deadline, all season long. But the trade deadline is now just a few days away, and things are really starting to pick up. We have a bunch of new reports to go over today, and let's dive right into it. The Leafs are coming off a pretty rough loss yesterday against the San Jose Sharks. We're going to just forget about that game because it was a brutal one. Darius, you were at the game, and you cursed the Leafs with their first loss after leading after two periods this season. But Frank Saravalli came out and revealed some interesting details. And he said on Riley Smith last night, it would make a lot of sense for the Leafs to bring him home to Toronto and add a little cup pedigree to their room and their third line, but they have to get a center first. And this comes out after a new report dropped, I believe it was late yesterday night, that Riley Smith is in all likelihood not only going to be available because he missed or they held him out of the game last night with the Rangers, but he's going to be available on the trade market. And the Leafs are, we'll dive into some of the reports here. The Leafs are linked, which is interesting because they need a third line center. And this is definitely not that. However, if the price for a third line center right now is out of hand, like we are told it is, and Riley Smith is available, I could see the sense when it comes to adding a little bit of talent on the wings.
I think that, doing this would make things very, very complicated if they're not going out to get a center first. So obviously, Sarah Valley is throwing this out there. To me, this doesn't make too much sense. We're going to get to it in the video. It really, really doesn't make any sense for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I mean, from the point of view of maybe add some talent, but still, we'll get to it in terms of stats and all that fun stuff. But again, they have to add a center first. That's the only way that this makes sense to me, because if you're adding another winger, Max Domi's probably going to have to play center. I don't think that fixes any problem. What happens with Calle Yarncroke? Are they going to trade him before the week's done, right? So could get very, very interesting. But to me personally, this does not make a lot of sense. And the Rangers, I mean, they are trading him. He is gone. He is not going to finish the year as a New York Ranger. He's been held out of their last two games. Peter Laviolette said he was a good Ranger in a press conference tonight, and he's still a part of the team. So clearly he's gone. He's not going to play another game for that team. So could get interesting. There are a few, things with his contract as well, where he has, a certain amount of teams on his no trade list. It seems like all of Canada and maybe Buffalo is on the list. That's what it's seeming like right now. So could get very interesting. He does have retained salary too, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, and whether or not he would waive it for the Leafs, I feel like most players, even if they have a lot of the playoff teams on their no, or Canada in this case, I feel like when push comes to shove, he has a chance to win. It might. I'm not too worried about the no trade clause part, but what I am worried about a little bit is the fact that we're hearing now about them pursuing wingers, and you can also see this here from Phil Kosher. I can think of no better fit for Riley Smith, especially if the New York Rangers retain half and the Leafs forever, an integral piece of two different Stanley Cup final runs with the Golden Knights. I just think he's a tremendous add at not an expensive price. And again, that's from Frank Saravalli, but Phil, of course, tweeted it. So shout out to Phil Kosher for that. But the thing here that's interesting, and I'm with you at some degree, like it doesn't make a lot of sense in theory. However, we've been told the price for, I mean, a third line center, whether, or a lot of the players, whether that be Scott Laughton, and we're hearing some rumblings about, Nick Bukestad, Jan Negro, all these things are elite prospects for the Leafs or first round picks. Now, if you can go out, you still need to figure that out because Max Domi, I don't think he's been playing well at all lately. A really bad game yesterday against the San Jose Sharks. But that aside, he's been playing on the third line center. If Brad Treliving says, okay, we're not going to go ahead and get a center because they're way too expensive, which would be disastrous, I do think they will, and they see a guy like Riley Smith available for something really cheap, and then you figure out the rest after, that's the only way I can see this happening, but I'm sure there's tons of other teams trying to bid on him, so it's a little bit interesting. However, if they go out and they get a third line center first, then you can start to convince yourself, at least I can start to be convinced a little bit, of adding some more veteran leadership to the wings and a guy who actually could provide more value than Nick Robertson or even Pontus Holmberg. Even though I think Pontus is playing better lately, I'd rather Riley Smith than either of those two in the playoffs. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to as it pertains to fit is no matter how complicated it gets, you need a third line center. But if you add him, he is better than the current options, especially Nick Robertson.
I think I could agree with him in the lineup in the playoffs might be a better option. Maybe Holmberg on the wing, second line left wing, especially. And we don't know what's going to happen with Pat Shreddy. He hasn't seemed to be able to stay healthy this season. And Nick Robertson, I mean, he has changed his game a little bit. I'm interested to see if he does end up getting into the playoffs or even sticks with the team past this week. That's still up in the air. So I do agree that that could be another option. But again, to me, it doesn't make too much sense if you're not going out and getting a center. Why would you add at the wing position? Again, you need to fill that third line center role. Domi cannot play that, especially this year. He hasn't had a good season. He hasn't been able to figure it out. So I don't know if it makes much sense. The only thing here is the Pittsburgh Penguins traded Riley Smith to the New York Rangers this past summer. They retained salary. If the Rangers retain more salary, his contract doesn't look that bad. They can definitely make it work. Although, following the Rangers a little bit closely this season, he hasn't done much for that team. And I know it's the regular season and he's won Stanley Cups, but at the end of the day, we've seen the Leafs acquire players who've been there, done that. Hasn't really helped the team because it's going to fall on the shoulders of the guys who've been there. So they need to plug in the holes, not add more leadership. That's just the way I see it. I think they have to, they have a couple holes. They need a depth defenseman and they need a third line center, right? So try and acquire those players. I know that the market is crazy, but try to find players that can kind of fill in those roles instead of finding a guy who's going to bring, winning pedigree, I guess. At this point, we know that it doesn't work. It is going to fall on the shoulders of the core four and Morgan Riley. I keep saying that, but it is. I think Riley Smith doesn't make too much sense for this team. I don't know where you would put him, right, at this point in time. So, it's going to get very interesting. He is available. He's not going to play another game for the Rangers. So I wonder if the Leafs are, kind of kicking tires on anything right now just to see, what everyone costs at this point to see, okay, maybe we pivot our plans a little bit. But it's going to be interesting. And it sounds like Treliving could be pivoting a lot of his plans in the last couple of days.
Yeah, also looking at acquiring defenseman, which we'll have videos on at the blue line. But I mean, yeah, you look at their lineup right now. We saw it in yesterday's game. I think Calle Yarncroc, he had a pretty good game against the San Jose Sharks. Maybe replaces him. Like you mentioned, you could see a world where if they get it doesn't have to be Riley Smith. It could be just a winger in general. Could be Pontus Holmberg he replaces, although Pontus has been playing a little bit better as of late. So I agree. I don't think there's a fit directly now. However, if they go out and they get a center and then they want to really push their chips in the middle and he doesn't cost too much, you look at his stats. I mean, he's a solid player. He's not having a great year this year, like you mentioned. 29 points in 58 games. He's 33 years old. But one thing that he does bring is playoff success, individual playoff success. And you can look at some of his stats. I had it brought up there for a minute. You can see this here. Granted, the Leafs get a third line center first. Riley Smith to be a pretty seamless fit alongside Tavares and Nylander. 6'1" and 79 points in 106 playoff games. And that's why they'd be bringing him in. It would be for the playoff stats. And I don't hate it as much as you do. I think just simply because I like players who produce in the playoffs, and it would be the second line the more you look at it. This wouldn't really be a third line winger. You can keep Bobby McMahon in the third line. Even if you keep Robertson, then you're good. You keep your fourth line together with Calle Yarncroc, who actually generates scoring chances, unlike the other players who have been on the fourth line this season, whether that be even Lorentz or Ryan Reeves, although I've liked Lorentz's game. I just think replacing Holmberg with Riley Smith, albeit if it's for a cheap price and they get a third line center for a guy who has playoff success, I don't hate it. However, if this is their only move, I will be absolutely furious. And it makes zero sense if it's their only move. You're better off keeping the assets at that point and going with who you have at the current juncture.
Yeah, it makes no sense if it's their only move, right? Like you can put him on the wing and maybe he's a little bit better than Holmberg in that position in the playoffs, but it makes no sense because you still have a hole at third line center. In the playoffs, we've seen with the teams that have won, the Florida Panthers, the St. Louis Blues that, Craig Berube coached just a couple of years ago, or I guess 5 years ago at this point. Each and every line has a role and a purpose, right? So you need to have that with this team if they're going to win the Stanley Cup. You don't have to go out and acquire Mikko Rantanen, but each line needs a purpose, and I feel like they need to fill in these holes ahead of the deadline. That's the biggest thing. It doesn't have to be the biggest name on the market. You just have to make sure that the lineup makes sense heading into the playoffs. And obviously, injuries happen, and you can deal with those when they happen. But I am interested to see what Treliving has up his sleeve the next couple of days because they got to fill in these holes. So Riley Smith could be an interesting option for sure. From what I've seen so far this year, doesn't make sense to me personally. Wouldn't be mad if they did it, right? I'm still going to cheer for the Leafs, and I hope that they win, of course. But again, as we get closer to the deadline here, I have a feeling the Leafs, because they play Wednesday, a move's going to happen today or Thursday, right? I think it's going to happen today. So it's going to get very interesting very quickly.
Yeah, we'll keep you up to date. Also, let us know, do you want Riley Smith? What side of the fence are you on? And because me and Darius a little bit different on this one. But let us know down below what your thoughts are. Ultimately, it's going to be interesting. This player is going to get traded like we've been seeing. So he is going to get traded. The cap it, double retention. It seems like a Brad Treliving move. But ultimately, we'll see. Let us know down below. Thank you guys for watching.